Hi, this is going to be my longest and most painful video ever, bar absolutely none. In recent years, I've been fascinated by comically long videos ranking a bunch of games. It's just fun to watch 3 hours of someone ranking every Capcom PS1 game or something, and it gives me a great history lesson as to a company's lineup. Some specific creators I've enjoyed who do that sort of content are Kim Justice, Sean Shodson, and of course Schaefrillis Productions, whose video ranking every film directed by film legend Steven Spielberg inspired me to do something of my own. I have some videos ranking stuff, but never quite as big an undertaking as those aforementioned creators. So I have decided to dive headfirst into the genre of videos you need to clear an afternoon to watch, and I will be playing every single video game based on a film directed by Steven Spielberg. As you presumably know, Steven Spielberg is a legendary director, probably the guy associated with the word movie director the most. He's that famous, and was responsible for molding tons of ways about the film industry today. He's responsible for blockbusters too, of which licensed games are plenty, so this is gonna be a huge project for sure. Do you know how many games there are I'm reviewing? 68. 68. 68 games ranging from the prime examples of licensed crap to some actually pretty good games. For a man with a career like Spielberg's, there's gonna be so many people attempting to imitate what he's done and project them onto other formats for a cheap buck, but with a guy who's made so many great movies, there's also bound to be some genuinely great material, enhanced by his iconic stories and worlds. Some of the Spielberg movie franchises just seem to lend themselves extremely well to video games, which is why there are so many of them. I mean, Tomb Raider and Uncharted are two of the biggest game franchises ever, and they have Indiana Jones inspiration written all over them. So I guess that's just why these games seem fascinating to me, and I want to talk about them like this. Some things to note are that I will not be including games based on properties created by Spielberg, but not directed by him, or things he produced, unless it's a game based on a property he created. So, an Indiana Jones game with an original story, that would count, but a game based on Jurassic Park 3 or Jurassic World, those wouldn't count. Thank God, because those two things would double the length of the Jurassic Park games, which is already a huge amount. It has to be directed by him to be on here. If there's a Jurassic Park game you know that isn't on here, go double check. Make sure it isn't Jurassic World or Jurassic Park 3, okay? Or Jurassic Park Institute Tour. Yes, I dig deep for this video. I know that might sound a little disappointing, but I have a compromise for you, because in case you didn't know, Spielberg is not just a film director. He also has had a hand in some video games. They're not all games he directed, but I will be throwing in some of the video games he helped make, even if I might miss a few. If I do miss a few games, by the way, don't tell me. That would devastate me. Just, please don't do it. DLC packs or crossovers don't count, so no Zen Pinball or Lego Dimensions. I'm only going to be covering a port of a game if it can be reasonably assumed to be a different game. So I will talk about like Jurassic Park on Game Gear, but not something like the 5,000 ports of any 8-bit game on various microcomputer systems. And I'm not including the mobile games as well. So many of them are delisted, and I just don't give a shit about them anyways. Sorry. If you're wondering, wait, is this guy even talking about E.T. on Atari 2600? Especially E.T. on Atari 2600. Actually, if you're familiar with James Rolfe, the Angry Video Game Nerd, he has a video on Spielberg games, which was a lead up to the 2014 Angry Video Game Nerd movie, where the main conflict was about that infamously crappy game. So, my goal for this project is to make even more content in this video than his entire movie and his video. I don't think it'll be that hard. That's about all I got, so let's get into these, starting with the worst of all these games. Yeah, I can't play this one, so I'm putting it at the bottom, and frankly, I don't like that this video means I need to talk about it. It's like a weird VR minigame collection based on Ready Player One, and this screams cash grab so loudly, I'm glad I don't have to play it. This game claims to be in beta, but it came out in March of 2018, and no development updates yet, and no one even cares about this movie anymore, so yes, this is hardly the Oasis in real life. But hey, at least the attempt awards it with the worst game based on a Spielberg film. Yeah, this is in fact worse than E.T. for 2600. There are a lot of E.T. games that are worse than E.T. for 2600. Seriously, what the hell is this? If you sit most people down who hate on E.T. for the 2600 and you told them to play this, their rhetoric would immediately change from E.T. is a bad game to E.T. is a horrible game series. You play as either E.T. or Elliot in certain game missions, in an isometric view, and are tasked with either collecting items or just trying to make it to the end, both of which would have been fine for a dumb licensed kids game on Game Boy Advance, but here they happen to have made both characters' movement horrible. E.T. and Elliot control extremely slowly, but also take a weird amount of time to actually move, meaning it feels like you have a 40-pound backpack on at all times. The areas are actually huge, and it can take a long time to beat a stage because of how aimless and meandering it can be. You better hope you find stuff quickly and don't have to wander around. The worst part of the game though has to be the enemies. They're usually bugs or frogs and stuff, which move really fast and unpredictably. Combining that with your movement, it makes for a miserable time where you'll get hit constantly. For some reason, when an enemy hits you, they flash. Like, that's usually employed to denote iframes, but here it happens because they attacked you, so it took me a while to even realize I wasn't attacking them and my health is going down. Of course, there are also soldiers and scientists who hang around in forests that you're gonna get caught by a lot. Judging by how they sound and what they do to you when they catch you, it's best not to think about what they were doing in the forest. The design of this game would have been enough to make it pretty damn low, but that combined with the crushingly painful movement and how that movement changes everything in the game makes this one of the worst games I've played yet. To be entirely fair though, I did not play this in New Zealand or Grenada, so that might change things, who knows. I suppose you might be correct in saying it's weird to put a game so low when it's literally just a tracker and minigame collection for kids. To be honest, that's kinda true, but they broke the #1 rule of this genre, which I'm just realizing exists now. Don't have one incredibly grating song that plays throughout the entire game. Don't do that. This game is a to-do list, a calendar, a clock, and a minigame collection on Game Boy Color themed around E.T. This game starts with like a 10-minute sequence where you're prompted to enter your home address and phone number. The days before internet safety, man. You know, I feel like this is actively harmful to kids, right? It literally makes them enter their home address, email, state, and city. When most people talk about a game aging poorly, they mean the camera is weird or something. This game has aged so poorly that if a 10-year-old would play it, they might get on... You know what? I'm not going to talk about pedophilia in the third game discussed in this video. I already did that in the second one. I'm playing this at like 1 AM, and I genuinely wondered how I got to this point. I suppose there were basic minigames like sliding block puzzles, but this would be so lame for even a kid, I had to put this so low. E.T. and the Game Boy go together like peanut butter and socks. I don't think I've ever played a farming sim that has made me angry at plants before. Like, I'll play this game, and then I'll go outside for a bit, and I'll see a plant, my day is ruined. I'm just kidding, I live in Canada, and it's in the winter, I can't see those for like the next 3 months. Anyways, the piece of trivia that E.T. was originally a botanist in the movie take center stage because this is a farming simulator about E.T. for the Game Boy Color. Right off the bat, I want to say it's at least a charming idea, and this game is cute. Look at this slug. I like him. The game very quickly gets boring. I haven't played many farming sim games, but I can tell a good game in that genre needs to have a solid amount of things to do, as well as the opportunity to build a farm to be satisfying and relaxing. I suppose it's possible to have a stressful farming sim if you do it right, but that is besides the point. E.T. and the Cosmic Garden is just you waiting around and watering or feeding plants when they need it. Without any interesting gameplay, it's just do the thing when you need to do it, and it's a very boring title. The plants are constantly needing something, and it can make it really frustrating when the Game Boy Color hardware obviously isn't the fastest way to do it. And the slug. I don't like the slug. Sure, he eats weeds for you, but you need to be constantly moving your plants because you might just go up to them and eat them. He's supposed to be your friend, and he makes the game 10 times more irritating. I don't like getting mad at my dog for eating my food or my cat for shitting everywhere. Well, I mean, manure actually helps in this game, I guess, but it doesn't make it better. I'm allowing myself one W-bomb for this entire video. I'll say it now. Whose idea was this? In 1989, to coincide with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, LucasArts released Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade: The Graphic Adventure for DOS. It was a big success, it got tons of praise, and became LucasArts' best-selling game at the time. It even paved the way for the much more beloved The Secret of Monkey Island a year later. Except they needed a shitty tie-in action game, so Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade: The Action Game was born. This game makes my head hurt. Also, do note, this game did originally release on Amiga, and was designed for it, but I couldn't get an emulator of it to work, so I'll play the Genesis version since that's technically the closest to an Amiga. Anyways, it's pretty bad, so you know what, I'm gonna just list out all the baffling design choices in this game. Literally, like in a list. 1. Your whip attack gets weaker over time. It just does, and you can't reverse it unless you die. I wish I could say the W word again. Number 2. Jumping and hitting the ceiling deals damage to you. This is whether or not they actually indicate the ceiling would do this with spikes. Number 3. You only have 2 lives and 2 continues. Number 4. Water instantly kills you, and there are several ropes you climb down that lead into water. There's just loads of traps you would have no way of knowing beforehand in general. Number 5. What the hell even is this minecart thing? Number 6. Isn't it just fantastic to include a fake-out boss ending on the first level? Yes, all of this was just in the first level. This game is just endlessly frustrating, and there's very little redeeming about it. If you think the second level might be a bit better, well, it's the train from the young Indiana Jones part of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and there's tunnels and these poles that kill you every 2 seconds if you aren't paying attention to them. There's only 5 levels anyways, so I guess you could consider that a positive. It's over quickly. But also, you have 5 levels, why dedicate 2 of them to young Indiana Jones? The 3DS version of Jaws Ultimate Predator is the most lifeless depiction of eating people ever. You just move around slowly in circles. Of course, a shark is always in motion, and you ram into boats or chomp on people. Just look at this game, it's so bland. Not even people's screams as you eat them has emotion to them, and there's so little to the game. The fact that it's such an early 3DS game, it really isn't an excuse. I would say the only concept from this game that's actually pretty interesting is the fact that the story is told with journal entries from the human's perspective. That could be interesting if it wasn't just a recap of the Jaws plot. You could just get that experience from Jaws' IMDb page, or watching the movie. There's also a Wii version which I haven't played yet, but it's definitely more interesting. Only it has motion control, so I can't exactly easily emulate it. Look at this art style though, like damn. The box art of Indiana Jones in the Lost Kingdom for Commodore 64 says you don't get any hints or guidance because Indiana Jones wouldn't get any. What the fuck do you mean? He's an archaeologist. Do you think he's never been in a university class before? You know what Indiana Jones would never do? Genuinely. Play this game. So this entry is actually a 3-in-1, because these games are actually ZX Spectrum Text Adventure series. They are official, but they're in Czech, so I can't play them. I'm putting it at this spot because the title screen for the first game looks funny. I'm not even joking when I say everything lower than this is worse than the amusement I got from this title screen. Yes, there's another ET game for Atari 2600, and it is worse than that one. Aliens Return. Admittedly, part of this low ranking was that it's very hard to get information on this game. I couldn't even find a manual or anything to explain how you play. In fact, there's so little to go on for this one that I'm writing this is making my brain hurt. This game has no ET branding in North America, gee I wonder why, but the original German version is titled Ufi und sein Gefährtscheich Einheit, or E.T. Go Come. E.T. Go Come is a sort of maze game where you have to wander around and go in these things to get collectible ship parts and to go home, or go come. Of course, you also need to avoid the Pac-Man ghost equivalents. At least I think, I have no idea. See, I don't like to be deliberately unfair to games, even if they are pretty unambiguously terrible. But right now, it should say something about the quality of this release that all the things I want to say were already covered by the angry video game nerd. Look, I acknowledge the 2600 was a completely different era, and it's perfectly fun that a lot of games needed a manual to work, but I can't even figure out how to play a simple maze game. Even the Wikipedia page has some pretty poor grammar when trying to talk about this game. How much do you want to bet it was directly translated from German? Why am I even talking? Avoiding the ghosts is pretty easy too, and it doesn't really feel like Pac-Man, which this game was undeniably inspired by, where those ghosts are smart and have unique ways of tripping you up. You might think I'm being uncharitable to this game, and sure, you're probably right, but I feel like E.T. Go Come is one of those animals that are so ugly there aren't any charities set up to protect their habitat, so it's physically impossible to not be uncharitable to it. Now, technically, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom on NES is a port of an arcade game, and said arcade game also has ports to the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, Amiga, and other computer systems Americans won't recognize because they don't know anything about British games. But it's pretty different, and Wikipedia lists it as its own separate game, so I'm sure I'll make my playlist even longer. We'll get the arcade version in a while, because it's a very bad port of a pretty good game. First of all, any actual simulation of a cave is completely gone when the game isn't ugly, bright shades of blue and green. I didn't expect an arcade perfect experience, but you didn't have to do that. The game is a simple isometric game, where you run around whipping bad guys, rescuing children who give you guns as a reward for their safety and the like. It's fine, but isn't particularly special. Then the minecarts come along. Yes, they fucked up the minecarts, the best part of the actual movie. And in most Temple of Doom games, honestly. So you jump between them and the ground, and it makes this game a headache to go through. It's a very painful jump, by the way, and sometimes Indiana Jones just spins in place for a few seconds when he runs on the ground, which is really funny. This is a mix of arcade gameplay and token changes to make it original. The original game had minecarts in a completely different section, but it's different here. This game's just a weird mess, and I wish how it looks. It's painful. The game's just painful. There was this one level that even removed my ability to use this knife, and instead gave me a metal detector for finding that treasure. And in this condition, playing the game is even worse. I don't want to say this game looks good or anything, because it's pretty bad. Look at it. It doesn't look that good. But it looks like it has the seeds of an interesting look to it. Like, I could see what they're going for. I do like how when you defeat pirates, they just fly off the screen. That was cute or whatever. This version of Hook is just a really forgettable game, and just don't make platformers like this, okay? Oh my god. Look at this. Look at this Wikipedia page on NES Jaws. That is loosely based on the film franchise of the same name, specifically Jaws the Revenge. Technically, I could have skipped this one. Well, a non-Jurassic Parker indie game is still welcome, I suppose, and hey, look at that cover. The Rainbow of Doom. Also, Atlas developed this. They made Eggs of Steel, you know. So, Jaws has some benefits to it, but it's still a pretty painful time. You go around on a boat between certain areas and encounter side-scrolling stages where you attack a probably not legal amount of local manta rays. They occur really quickly, and they're honestly not much of a challenge. The enemies are slow and easy to hit and avoid. The stages repeat over and over with barely any variation, and they quickly become something I strongly want to avoid. But you can't avoid them. It's like RPG random encounters, but worse. Of course, sometimes Jaws can appear in these encounters if you find him. Well, I mean, I know the shark isn't actually named Jaws, but that's what this game calls him. It's a big shark swimming around. After doing some damage to him, you will have to search around for him again to finish the job. Repeat for 45 minutes. I sort of like the concept of this. The idea of one game essentially being a huge boss fight where you spend the whole time chipping away at one enemy. That sounds like a good concept, and a great concept for a Jaws game. Too bad there is basically no real dread to that shark. The whole game is repetitive and not challenging, and Jaws just kind of swims around and doesn't go for you, besides limply biting. He's just not a big threat. It's not the worst, but I'd say Jaws NES is an empty experience, and certainly a real LJN classic. Just a heads up, by the way, in my research I found that some Jaws games that I thought were official didn't seem to be. Stuff like Shark Jaws, or a weird Jaws text adventure on Commodore 64 where you play as the shark. Turns out the word Jaws in relation to sharks is not that easy to copyright. So just a reminder that I'm only covering official stuff here. There's also a separate game called Jaws the Computer Game for Commodore 64.
I don't like this game. I don't like this game. I don't like this game.
Not all the controls worked for me, unfortunately. The beast itself, in the flesh. You know, I'd say in a heartbeat, E.T. for Atari 2600 is not that bad, but it's just such a complicated topic, because some of the games on Atari 2600 feel more like board games to me in a way. You start up a game like this or Yara's Revenge, and you need to read a manual to have a grasp on what you're doing. Said manuals explain the game mechanics in great detail, putting out every single aspect to a game, because you'll have no idea what to do if you don't catch up on it. And back in the day, I imagine this was seen as the only real way to have experiences more advanced than the arcade in the home. E.T. the Extraterrestrial has you play as E.T. on a quest to recover 3 pieces of an interplanetary telephone to phone home and all that. You avoid FBI agents who can take your telephone pieces, and scientists who can just briefly capture you and are constantly running out of energy. There are constant wells throughout the game, and you can drop into them and need to do a weirdly clunky flying thing to get out. There's also some candy, conveniently not titled Reese's Pieces. And there's also power zones where you can do certain things. There's an eat candy zone where you can eat candy to regenerate health, send a human back zone, a call ship zone, which obviously only works if you have enough phone pieces, a move to a new site zone, which teleports you places, and a called Elliot zone, where Elliot takes your candy and he chases away humans and looks for a phone piece, and if you don't have enough pieces, he takes them and just goes home. And, explaining all this, I think I see the problem. To this game's credit, its mechanics are explained fine, but it's just a bizarre headache and a really weird amount of things to remember. It takes a while to get a game like Yara's Revenge to really get that game, but it's a classic because stuff works together decently once you get the hang of it. Like a good board game, too. E.T. isn't that. And I mean, accidentally falling into wells while running away, it's just awkward. It just is. That said, the issues aren't game breaking. It's an okay adventure game from the 80s. You can kind of have fun with it, and there is definitely a case to be made about how it's a really ambitious game, but it's not going to be very memorable. It's hard to get mad at. It's just a piece of bread. Do people still get mad at you for using food metaphors when talking about a game? Whatever. The only real reason this game was so panned is because it was a game based on such a big blockbuster movie. And yes, criticize an overhyped title, but come on, it's 2024. You're really gonna call it the worst video game of all time? And, I mean, Atari was in the wrong. I'm not saying they're not, but I do somewhat question what people in the early 80s thought a life-changing E.T. video game would have actually been. The shitty Game Boy E.T. games are spreading, and the same company made an E.T. game for PS1. E.T. Interplanetary Mission is a top-down game, where E.T. travels to other planets, which doesn't seem like the best idea considering his track record, but maybe this is a prequel. You go around solving puzzles by generally just taking stuff and putting them on switches. There's not much to say on the puzzles themselves because they're surface level, and mostly boil down to using E.T.'s telepathy ability to move objects onto switches, or looking around for the right thing to put on those switches. You can also run and have a wave attack where you shoot at these alien things. Here's the problem though. The camera jerks at every single motion, and it's terrible. This game gives me motion sickness. I guess the planets look nice or whatever, but this game just... it gives me motion sickness, and the lack of anything interesting makes it a pretty miserable experience. You know, a very young and hip guy such as myself has heard talk about a weird old text adventures on an artifact known as an Apple II, and having played Indiana Jones in The Revenge of the Ancients, I now know how insane they can be if you're not expecting them, and they've still got some fun novelty. And they've still got some fun novelty to them, even if it's for 20 minutes at 12:34 a.m. on a January night on a laptop. Indiana Jones in Revenge of the Ancients has Indy in a temple, and you need to type commands to navigate and get a treasure. You need to be quick though, because otherwise Indy will die into some traps and the Nazis are in pursuit of you. In fact, any big wrong move will probably get you killed by a trap. Those Mazatec, always putting death traps in their temples. I don't think I need to explain how it's a pretty dated game. Oftentimes you need hyper-specific commands to actually do something. And something as simple as going to another room to get a hand can require tens of attempts just doing whatever and seeing what gets a different text box. You might think yourself a clever guy and type shitposty things like this is a 1987 chat GPT, but you'll find out pretty quickly that doesn't really work. Although the computer does get really mad at me for saying shit, it's funny. The descriptive language and writing of this game is a highlight, and it works a lot better as a game than you might expect. I imagine programmers would have had to spend tons of time accounting for all the possible variations of phrases someone could type out and how to even respond to them. The other most infamous game in this list is Jurassic Park Trespasser. It's a game that blurs the lines between being ambitious and being ballsy, and it makes so many decisions that are so ridiculous and objectively bad that it's fascinating. You play in a first-person view, and you know how the spacebar is basically always how you jump in these types of games? Yeah, well, here it's how you fire, and Q is how you jump. And that's one of the less weird parts of the controls. To pick up stuff, you need to slowly reach out your arm with the left click, which, by the way, has you hold your hand flat, which means you can very easily make a pose that Steven Spielberg would famously not approve of. So you pick stuff up with the right click. Your hand has these ragdoll physics, which makes you feel like you're playing a survival horror game, as if it's Surgeon Simulator. And worst of all, the game's just really slow. You just move really slow in general, and it's not exactly a good experience at all. My game actually glitched and didn't let me save, meaning I needed to restart a level each time I died, which makes it even more painful. Sorry for not playing too much of this, by the way, but can you blame me? Your character is named Anne. She's pretty much a regular woman who crashed on the island from the Lost World Jurassic Park and needs to use some conveniently placed guns to fight her way out. Imagine crashing and thinking you're lucky when you realize you're alive, only to get attacked by a velociraptor. Speaking of dinosaurs, they're not hard to beat or anything as long as you have ammo, because one bullet between the eyes is enough to take out a raptor, so at least that's not as frustrating, unless you're left resorting to swinging a bat around. But what's really notable about dinosaurs is the fact that this game, ballsy as it was for the time, really tries to make them feel independent. You know, like they're actual real creatures. So all their body parts move independently as well. Their heads can be bobbing up and down as their legs and arms twitch. It's hilarious. This is a pretty objectively bad game, but damn it, I actually kind of like it. First of all, this is a survival horror game. It would be like if someone made Resident Evil 7 way before someone should have made Resident Evil 7. Awkwardness is a cornerstone of survival horror, and there's an odd sort of way the game and its controls seem to work, despite being terrible ideas. And the experience of crouching to hide from a raptor sniffing around, or at least you think they're sniffing around, it's really hard to tell what they're even doing. It's actually kind of fun, unironically. Furthermore, this game has absolutely no UI in actual gameplay. Your health bar happens to be a tattoo on your breast, and take one guess as to how ammo is shown to you. Was that what you guessed? I actually don't hate this. It's silly, but it works, and one thing you can't deny about this game is that it's successful at making you feel like you're just an ordinary person. You've also probably noticed this before, but just look at the world of this game. It's huge and vast, but in the actual game it's fairly linear, which almost grounds the world in a way. I've seen people talk about this game and say it's so impressive it happened before Half-Life 2, and my brother in Christ, this was before Half-Life. This is real ambition. The game looks pretty beautiful, and the time I first saw a massive Brachiosaurus towering over me was kind of beautiful. There's tons to talk about with this game, and it's absolutely fascinating. Just like most games, including E.T. for Atari, the story behind it is a lot more than just bad game. That's a big part of the story, and it's true. It's just not all of it. E.T. Escape Planet Earth is the least bad E.T. game on a Game Boy system. Thanks, New Kid Co. It's an isometric puzzle game where E.T. and Elliot go around the town trading bottle caps and baseball cards for parts of a phone E.T. needs to get home, which kids around the neighborhood just have. He collects these in some pretty simple little puzzles, some of which make use of Elliot as a second playable character. Most of the difficulty isn't in how approachable the puzzle is, but in the fact that a wrong move or timing being off could cause you to need to reset the puzzle, and an emphasis on that has always been a trope I dislike, but they're definitely not bad puzzles by any means, and it can be pretty pleasant at times to just go through some simple little puzzles your little head doesn't need to think about. It's really not that deep, though. It's really not that deep, though, and as usual, the music is extremely grating after a while. I'm starting to develop a migraine now, and I'm going to attribute it half to the game and half because I played it at 3 a.m. Hey, I like to suffer for my art. The Lost World Jurassic Park is a platformer where you play as a dinosaur. Yes, you play as a dinosaur, and no, it's not a novel idea because Jurassic Park Genesis did it before. And only slightly better, to be honest. This game is secretly a humanistic masterpiece because the controls of a dinosaur are so bad, it'll make you want to be human again. The dinosaur whose name I forget has a weird type of control where she takes a delay to walk forward, a long pause when she turns, and jumping is... You shouldn't have to make this dinosaur thing jump, and platforming is everywhere in this game. There's also fall damage, which some people will say has no place in platformers. I disagree, but it at least has to have some kind of indication when there's even damage being done, which I didn't see. You also take like 3/4 of your life bar from a 3-foot jump. It makes for a pretty miserable platforming experience. As for the attacking, there's plenty of dinos to beat up, and that just amounts to mashing the same attack button over and over again, in case your thumbs weren't bloody at all. Now, as you can see, this is a 2D platformer, which is rare for the PS1, which is rare for a PS1 game, and I actually do really like the way it looks. The textures look nice, and while the platforming is miserable, you can at least see where to jump and stuff. And the game has branching paths, which are communicated well enough, and it's cool to see stuff like this that couldn't really be done in this console generation before. And it's cool to see stuff like this that couldn't really be done before this console generation. It doesn't quite alleviate the terrible controls, but it makes it a bit better. To be clear, there are other playable characters. They aren't any better. There actually are some pretty good ideas design-wise in this game, so I suppose it is pretty interesting to look at, but it makes it far from the distant memory known as a good game. So, for whatever reason, my computer won't let me record Windows games, so I don't have any real footage, so I'll just put this on screen. Anyways, E.T. Away from Home is a Windows E.T. themed board game for children. I'm talking Earthlings 5 and up. Games like these are a little hard to review because I'm just so removed from the target demographic, but I can still enjoy kids' games, and this has some charm to it. I like the way it looks with those late 90s, early 2000s pre-rendered backgrounds and character models, and the dialogue is cute, I guess. It's a 1 or 2 player game where you play as either Elliot or Gertie and go across the house to play mini games. They're not like Mario Party stuff, they're like dress up mini games and various things for Earthlings around the age of 5.
Look at my man.
Maybe the challenge or prize you previously had means it's not as robust as some imagine it to be. There's an unfortunate glitch where
Okay.
will sometimes be
Look at him.
I find it funny that if you play single player, and if the other person lands on a minigame stage, they just say, "Nah, I don't feel like it," and it skips their turn. Obviously, this game doesn't have winners or losers too. You can't have 5-year-old Earthlings pitted against each other. So I guess it's innocent fun, but Click Yellow Candy isn't really the most riveting gameplay to me. We got ourselves a weird one on our hands. Raiders of the Lost Ark for Atari 2600 is one of the premier games I think of when I hear of licensed games on the Atari, and I actually do have quite a lot of respect for the Atari games. The design and how the games were just thought of back then is so fundamentally different from today that it's a nice oddity and can give us some genuine quality at times. Raiders of the Lost Ark, however, is just it's an experience that's basically impossible for me to review. This game was famous for needing two controllers to play, since the 2600 had a single button on it, one to move and one to switch which item you use. I'm obviously not using original Atari 2600, and I could not find a patch or hack that makes it so you can use one controller on an emulator. So I can't really play past the first screen, but I can comment on what I have played, and it seems fine, I guess. Definitely a more advanced version of adventure, adding basic puzzles, and it's pretty much a more advanced version of adventure, adding basic puzzles and even different types of weapons, which must have been revolutionary at the time. You get a whip and a gun. The Atari, of course, comes with two controllers, so this clunky way of playing at least works for most owners of the system. It's not like you need to pay extra to get this game to work, Amiibo Festival style. For the time, I can see it being a pretty good game, and for now, I suppose it can be pretty fun if you can deal with it, even if it not aging well goes without saying. It definitely gets lower because of that, and there's probably only like a couple games this game would continue to be novel or exciting. E.T. Phone Home Adventure is another kids game for Windows, for Earthlings 8 and up. Yes, aliens aren't allowed to play this game. Also, 8 and up is definitely overestimating the age demographic of this game. It's a point-and-click adventure game, a genre we're going to see a couple more times, but what's good about those games, and what usually makes them great for kids, is the little Easter eggs. The fact that you can click on a bunch of things and it'll make a noise or move or do something fun. This isn't that kind of game, unfortunately. And E.T. is so fucking slow. He's so goddamn slow, I hate it. I hate how slow he moves. Aside from that, I don't know. It's a children's game, but it does definitely have some charm to it, and it can be fun to figure out some of the puzzles, I suppose.
They're obvious. They're the ones. The babies, it's just the one, you know, the two alternating colors. It's easy. Baby can do that. What the fuck is this? Like, do I put... Yeah, that makes... But then I don't... Where's the other green? There's not another green, is there? Is this just random? I need some green here. Yeah, okay. Like, what? Is there supposed to be any green? God damn it, Elliot's mom. Why do you need the books? Oh my god. Okay, that's not Elliot's mom's OCD. That seems right. But yeah, that seems right. Is this the same thing? Do I... Oh, we need a yellow. Is this the... No, that can't be the solution, because then there's the... No, this isn't right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I tried to take something from the bookcase. It's emotional
You,
now.
you,
Couldn't see. Quick,
you can just...
play near your bookcase.
You-
It's dangerous. Well, let's see what you've done. Not bad here, but you made a few
Oh
mistakes.
my god, you could just tell... That was right! You could just told your mom. Oh my god. What the fuck is wrong with you? Is this what I did? Oh my god.
Now let's see how you've done.
Oh my god.
But you made mistakes.
Fuck this, Elliot's mom. Fuck you.
Ah, I think I finished it.
Where's the logic?
But there's still the other shelf to clean up.
No. What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? Okay. Blue, red, green, red, blue, red. This is oh no, that's pink. It's purple. It's purple. Purple, red, green, red, purple, red.
Are you nuts? This book isn't the right size.
That's just sizes now?
This one doesn't fit here.
What the hell is this? What the... This doesn't logically follow. None of this game makes sense. How's a kid supposed to get this? Jesus Christ. This doesn't, like... Kids don't even have pattern recognition skills yet. There's no green left?
It's not bad for kids, so I can't really put it lower, but it still could be more interesting for them. The Super Nintendo version of Hook feels like it should be a good game. The game looks great. I really like its general style, and the sprite work is very pleasant. The music is really nice, and the boss music especially sounds like it was ripped straight from Final Fantasy. Not like an especially good Final Fantasy song, but a decent one. It's an action platformer, and it's so slow. it's immediately noticeable how slow you move in this game, and it makes it incredibly painful if I'm to be honest. The movement is consistently stiff, and it feels really bland to be honest. It's a fairly hard game, and repeating a level is made so much worse with that pace. The level design is not as offensive as a lot of other games I have on here. It's just okay, even if most of what you do is just attacking enemies, which feels terrible when they're so much faster than you. I know I'm kind of getting caught up on this part a lot, but it really is a massive thing that I can't get over. In terms of new stuff, this game has a flight mechanic where these little Tinkerbell stations can give you temporary flight. Where these little Tinkerbell stations can give you the ability to fly for a short amount of time to go certain places. And you better know exactly where you intend to go, because the flight meter burns up in like 2 seconds. Overall, if you have an especially high tolerance, I'd say you could enjoy Hook. It's actually pretty divisive, and I find myself firmly on the negative side because of its painful control and the lack of any interesting level design. There's also an Amiga version of Hook that's a completely different game, but considering my track record, do you really think this game worked on my computer? I have played so many games that were just like the Game Boy version of The Lost World Jurassic Park that I went completely numb. This is such a numbing game. You play as two mercenaries who I guess are from the movie. Who cares, really? You go through stages, looking for eggs with some really awkward shooting controls, complete with tiny, impossible to kill dinosaurs. It's also a cinematic platformer style, which is sort of fine, but the lack of anything interesting is so tiring. And tiring is the perfect word to describe the experience of combing through a surprisingly intricate level to look for eggs, which is further frustrated by the slipperiness of your character. It's enjoyable. Maybe I'm being too harsh on it. It's just an average game, and I've played so many games of its ilk at this point that my tolerance for blandness is getting lower. Jurassic Park for the Sega Genesis is one of its most beloved games, and its 11th best-selling game. A lot of kids grew up with this thing, and still like it to this day. To that, I have to say, those kids are stupid, because it's not that good. I'm joking, yes, but it's not the best. You play as either Alan Grant or the Raptor, and go through a bunch of different levels. I picked Grant first, because I wanted playing as a goddamn Velociraptor to be a little treat for me at the end, and I'm glad I did, because it was so much better than the Grant gameplay. For him, you play through action platformer levels, fighting these dinosaurs which have confusing, janky physics, but are ultimately taken out with just a few shots. Your main enemy is the very ground beneath your feet. Platforming is slow and horrible. To be fair, it's not overly difficult since Grants can very easily grab ledges. I found myself making quite a few jumps I thought I wouldn't, but frequently the game just clips you through ledges, making you fall to your death, or just expects you to make tons of leaps of faith, both of which result in metric tons of cheap deaths. The platforming is a sort of pseudo-cinematic style, but it's horribly stiff, slow to react to anything, and just causes a lot of actual slowdown. Basically every time you jump, this game slows down. It's hard to find anything redeeming about Grant's sections, but luckily to my surprise, the Raptor has some better things. They're more focused on action as you play the part of a big dumb Velociraptor who gets to run around and beat up a bunch of things. They're fun, I suppose, because it's very satisfying to do it, but the game just feels lacking in depth, even in these sections, and nothing except for the carnage really sticks with me. Your attack is also very awkward. You do an absolutely massive leap forward every time you hit stuff, and just go forward a bunch, so it's awkward, but I can see kids having fond memories of this funny dinosaur mayhem. So I don't think its success was fueled entirely by the success of the movie, but It's definitely not by being a polished game. So this game gets weirdly hated on, but as you can probably tell from the name, Indiana Jones and his desktop adventures is literally supposed to be like solitaire. It's a game you play on the side of your desktop while you pretend to work. It's simple, but not bad. It's set in a fictional Central American country with a Mayan history. Quests are randomly generated and... Sorry, the game crashed when I tried to leave the first screen, but I'm gonna put it here anyways. Hey, I never said all these rankings were fair, okay? The true version of Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine is coming later, don't worry, but the Game Boy Color port is different enough that I'll talk about it. This game mostly plays from a top-down perspective, with Indy having access to a whip, a pistol, and more weapons as the game goes on. For the most part, it feels good. I mildly enjoyed platforming and getting around each level. These two things take up the majority of the runtime of the game, and yeah, they're pretty good, even if the depth perception can be a little off sometimes. Switching between weapons is also something that can be off. If a scorpion is actively chasing you, and you don't have a gun to shoot it, you need to press the minus button until you select it, that sort of thing. I mean, selecting stuff was already awkward in the original, so it's an accurate port, I guess. I played this like a day after the original, and it is pretty faithful, but a 3D game being made 2D like this does end up with some areas being barren. But it's not too big a deal. It's just kind of an okay game, and a fine port. Although one thing I noticed is that the original Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine had a story, and now it's basically incomprehensible, because each spot that had dialogue is now just a single line from the dialogue. Like, they gotta pick one line that best summarizes a whole conversation. I don't think it matters that much, because who cares about the story of a Game Boy game, but I did actually like the original story, and it's funny to see it butchered. Again, I need to stress, I don't really care, because it's funny. Jurassic Park Interactive is what I think it would be like if Scott Cawthon made a Jurassic Park game. Now, I am not just saying this because the framing of the game has you play as a security guard or operator, but rather because this game is made up of weird minigames and scary sections with jump scares. This is a weird game. You select certain characters on a map and can move them around the park to do one of 3 minigames. First is a shooter game. You control a shocker and shoot at dinosaurs who are spitting at you. This one is really easy. I don't know why, it's just very easy all the time. Second is a driving game, where you have to escape a T-Rex. I like this one, because the car is so unbearably difficult to control, and it just gets stuck on everything, but it actually kind of works, and adds to the terrifying situation in general. Third is the Backrooms. This is a maze where you escape from velociraptors, and the atmosphere and general 3D-O-ness of it it's terrifying. Holy shit. This is where the jump scare comes in, by the way. So, knowing all this, I don't think I need to explain the flaws with this game. It's super simplistic, and might seem big at first, but it very quickly shows itself to be just a minigame collection with 3 games, 2 of which are extremely difficult to control. But still, I can't help like this game and find it super interesting. Maybe it's that the structure of this game is so unusual, maybe it's the simplicity, or maybe it's the early 3D horror people seem to like a lot these days, combined with an odd sense of humor. It feels like a cult classic, or at least an oddity to look at, and it's definitely better than a lot of bland, overdone platformers I've seen before. Don't get me wrong, there will still be some bland, overdone platformers ahead of this game, though. There's also this weird Space Invaders clone minigame for some reason, and this is what I mean by a weird sense of humor. Man, I didn't think I'd get this far. Playing Jurassic Park Interactive for 3DO. I don't actually think this is what Scott Cawthon would make, by the way. That was an exaggeration. Although this game might have been improved just a little by a guy on the phone always talking to you. I had problems with the original Jurassic Park game everyone's played, but luckily there's an updated re-release titled Jurassic Park Rampage Edition. This is definitely an improvement, because a lot was actually changed in this game, including graphics but also the controls. The problem with clipping and whatnot is basically fixed, and it's just polished a lot more, especially with the Alan Grant segments. It's the same fundamental levels, but they're done a lot better here, even if it's not going to elevate it too highly. The Raptor is a little less satisfying though, because yeah, I like the fact that the claw attack isn't a big leap forward, but now it's been replaced by a weak kick. I honestly might even prefer the Grant levels this time, but they're still not the best. Enemy placement seems pretty random too. It doesn't even feel like level design was a thing they considered at all. But it's more fun than the original Jurassic Park on Genesis. I'm gonna be honest, man. I played like 10 minutes of this game. I'm not gonna pretend this is an objective review of this one particular entry, okay? This video was like 80% actually fair. Got it? The reason was because this game has a lot of motion controls which are pretty hard to emulate on PC when they're so common. A lot of motion controls in the entire game. The whole game is basically based on it. I'm not gonna say I hate all motion controls. The Wii has lots of good uses of it, but here it feels very unnecessary and forced. You need to swing the Wii remote to even attack. I'm not saying it's bad. I definitely can't comment on it that in depth, but it's definitely not a good first impression. The part I stopped playing at was this thing where the spiders started crawling on Indiana Jones, and you needed to shake the Wii remote to get them off. I ended up just kind of standing there, and it was really funny to be honest. Another thing that was cool is that the menus and introduction of this game sort of has a 1930s radio aesthetic. And I don't think I've actually seen that connected to Indiana Jones very much, despite his strong inspiration from pop culture of that era. So that was neat to see. Why did I put this game so high? Vibes, I guess. It's seen as like an average game, so yeah, that makes sense to me. NES Jaws. Everyone's like, what the hell? What? You played Jaws Unleashed and you got a panic in the comment section? I don't know. This reference doesn't even work. Jaws Unleashed is the Jaws game everyone's probably been waiting for. You play as the shark and you swim around eating fish, destroying piers, and eating people. Lots and lots of eating people. It did it before that other Jaws game where you play as a shark, by the way. Am I a beta male soy boy for feeling kind of bad for them? They're just trying to enjoy themselves at the beach, and they scream, "I don't want to die," all the time. I kind of feel icky sometimes playing this, you know? That said, the story is about a SeaWorld-like theme park built on the island from the first Jurassic Park movie, and I don't feel bad attacking the park bigwigs. I think it would have been cool if the game fully leaned into this, and maybe less attacking boats and beachgoers. Admittedly, moralizing Jaws might be a little strange, given he is essentially portrayed as an unambiguously evil demon in the movie. Anyways, the game was heavily criticized for its controls, and yes, it's pretty awkward. As a shark, you can only swim forward, not back, and you have tank controls which don't feel that great. Most of the time you'll be fighting against the controls, and while causing carnage can be fun, it hampers it. You also do have the ability to lock onto things, so that might make it easier, but it still comes with its own problems, and this game just doesn't feel that great to play. There is also a hunger meter, which is more of an annoyance to be honest, and it just means you'll have to regularly eat some fish. It doesn't really add to the depth that much. Jaws Unleashed is probably a little too overhated. Some people really insist it's a terrible game, but it doesn't have that many redeeming qualities, sorry. So I really don't know where to put Telltale Games Jurassic Park. For one, I haven't played it. Why do I keep doing this? It's delisted on pretty much everything now, and do you know how much expensive physical copies are? Well, they're like $50, which isn't bad, but I've already gone over budget for this video, man. It follows the usual Telltale formula found in popular titles like Batman, The Walking Dead, Wallace and Gromit. It's mostly narrative focused with quick time events and point and click adventure elements. I watched an hour or so of cutscenes and it's alright. It's not particularly engaging in my opinion, but I will definitely acknowledge the way I experienced it is not ideal. You probably couldn't even call it experiencing it. The story is generic. I mean, your protagonists are a dad and daughter and some mercenaries, which is about the most expected things ever for a Jurassic Park Telltale game story, and you don't really get a sense of wonder in the beginning that transitions into a borderline horror story, which is a lot of the movie's appeal for me. The dinosaurs go free, it just happens. This game is very divisive, and is often considered Telltale's worst. I haven't actually played any of the Telltale games before, except for Back to the Future, and I do want to play them eventually, so I hope I got the worst one out of the way now. Not to imply I played it, of course, but you know what? I was curious about the general audience reception to this game, and I found like half of the reviews said you could just get the same experience from watching all the cutscenes. So I did. Jones's Greatest Adventures is a fine 2D action platformer, and a game that's kind of hard to have strong feelings on. It's a compilation of levels based on the original Indiana Jones trilogy. The actual levels are perfectly fine. They're pretty fun at times, actually, even if a lot of the design is booby traps you need to watch out for, but it works fine, and it's not going to be too frustrating, which isn't that high a bar for this era, to be honest. The issue is these chase levels that appear every once in a while, where you'll have to run away from the iconic boulder or slightly less iconic fire. They just don't fit with a playstyle that much, to be honest. It's really frustrating how difficult it is to see obstacles, to be honest. It just would have been a way better game if these parts were not here, as odd as it would be to lack the boulder scene. So, yeah, it isn't the best game. It feels like Super Castlevania 4 if the developers cared less. A kid who likes Indiana Jones could definitely get a real kick out of this back in the day, though. Also, the game over screen is a picture of Indiana Jones' dad looking at him disappointed, so that made me want to play this damn game a little bit less. Writing this video has been really fun so far. Not just because I discovered some pretty good games, like the title-made Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for NES, but I've also found some weirdly fascinating stuff, like the title-made Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for NES. If I had to describe this game, I would say it's like an Indiana Jones minigame collection and a visual novel, kinda. Also, I do have to describe this game. That's what my job is in this video. So, this retells the story of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in little, smaller adventures you can do in any order. You have choices of adventures from the movie. Stuff like going to Venice or going to the castle to rescue Indy's dad. Usually it's an action stage, but even then, no two stages play the same. And it can even be stuff like a top-down motorcycle stage or a sliding block puzzle. I really like this format, because it makes you feel like you're on a series of adventures, and the presentation of it all is super impressive. And the technology... And the presentation of it all is super impressive for the technology. It was a late-gen NES game after all, released in 1991. And of course the final stage is going to get the Holy Grail, with a level made up of the letter puzzle from the movie and picking the right Grail. You can do this one in any order too, which means you can technically have an advantage if you've seen the movie. But if you have seen the movie, why would you want to go through the events of it without any of the emotional stuff? A big advantage of this game is also the soundtrack, composed by legendary games composer Tim Follin. Have you ever seen those memes about how Plock has a Hotline Miami song in it? Yeah, it was Tim Follin who made that, and it goes really hard here. It's honestly a big part about why I like this game. Here's the thing though, this game is very spread out, and each little minigame isn't that good. Anytime you have to fight anyone, it's extremely clunky, and it feels like you'll only hit an enemy about half the time. That's how off they can feel. Furthermore, when you've done a few missions, others get harder and brutal after a while. Not in a fun way, and in NES frustrating way. not NES hard way. Some missions even restart the whole game, which is a choice. Definitely a choice. Ultimately, this game has flaws, but I can't help but really like it. It's fun in short bursts, and it's one of the earliest games to really make you explore areas between the adventuring in Indiana Jones. Not too deep, of course, but there's just such a novelty in seeing Indy at home receiving telegraphs from Salah about what to do next being a thing. So basically adapting what childhood me would call the boring talking parts of the Indiana Jones movies. I'm probably ranking this a bit higher than it should be, but I can't help but think it's cool. We all know the Lego games, and yes, they were a staple of my childhood. I played Lego Star Wars, Batman, Pirates of the Caribbean, Lego Marvel Superheroes, Lego Dimensions, Lego Harry Potter, City Undercover, I think I got them all, and both Lego Indiana Jones. The first Lego Indiana Jones got a DS version, but it's pretty much a strike conversion. Lego Indiana Jones 2, however, is a pretty different title. For one, while the main version adapts the whole trilogy, and they recently released at the time Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, this DS version only has Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The hub world is also completely different. In the original Lego Indiana Jones, your hub world is Barnet College. In The Adventures Continue, it's a bunch of hub worlds for each level, with Area 51 or something as the main menu. And here it's a random tropical island. It's not that riveting to explore. Cutscenes are also a little different here. There's one at the opening with every single Indiana Jones villain in it for some reason, but then information is conveyed in journal entries from Indiana Jones to recount his journey. Some people would probably complain about this, because those cutscenes were iconic, but, it is... it is Lego Indiana Jones 2, so the cutscenes aren't that iconic. As for the gameplay itself, all that stuff from Lego Indiana Jones and probably like are here, from occasional beat-em-up sections mixed with puzzles based on characters' abilities, as well as platforming, and these parts where you need to build stuff. The levels will also occasionally be more linear and side-scrolly, but will still have collectibles, which happen to be the best part of the Lego games in my opinion. Anyways, yeah, this game is pretty much just a slightly more watered down Lego Indiana Jones. Despite being so different, it doesn't feel like it's that new if you've played a Lego game before. It's just not too noticeable, to be completely honest. It's serviceable since it's a DS game, and I'm not gonna say it's bad, but it's not the best, Sorry, but we are firmly in the it's hard to say anything about these games territory. The levels are definitely a lot more straightforward than most Lego games, and you don't really need to figure out a lot of stuff. It's just really obvious even for a kid's game. I also want to mention something annoying did happen. There was this one platforming challenge where I had to beat a level in 3 minutes, and then when I beat it, I guess I accidentally pressed restart and realized the challenge was actually part of the level and I had to redo it again. I don't know. That was mildly irritating. This is another weird one. A really weird one. In a good way. Steven Spielberg's director's chair is a game where you make a movie, or direct one rather. There's a short movie that plays where you can adjust the plot and change parts of the script. And yes, this short was actually directed by Steven Spielberg and features Quentin Tarantino and Jennifer Aniston as the protagonists. It's an interesting part of both film and video game history for sure. The game has been criticized for not really being what it was advertised. The decisions are limited, and you're really not in full control of a movie. Also, any download links didn't work on my laptop, so instead what I played was Steven Spielberg's director choices. It's a fan-made remake by Molly Industra, looking them up was a whole rabbit hole, and it strips out the movie editing thing and makes it a fully choice-based adventure game, with choices and deviations at key points in the story. This is a really fun story, to be honest, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. The game feels like college film students messing around or something. This makeable movie is so stupid. It's so much fun, and it's impossible to hate. It's about Tarantino being falsely accused of a crime, and Jennifer Aniston has to go undercover to a magic show to find evidence to rescue him. It's like 15 minutes long in this form, so it's not that in-depth. The choices are pretty funny though. A notable part is the end where your two options are happy ending and accidental execution. Am I a bad person for picking the latter? So, it's fun for that 15 minutes, but surprisingly, it's not that replayable since the choices aren't too different. And this whole thing definitely works a lot better as a fun thing you look at 25 years later after it released than as an actual product. It doesn't really seem substantive enough, and definitely not what someone would have actually wanted at the time. If this was a freeware browser game, then I probably would have ranked it a bit higher, because it's nothing short of amazing stupid fun, but it isn't, so I will not.
Yes, Governor. Yes, right away. Well, seems your girl's been playing beat the clock and won. Get him out of there.
This particular Jurassic Park game is a strategy game. It's similar to Command and Conquer, where one Command and Conquer. For this particular Jurassic Park game, we have a strategy game. It's similar to Command and Conquer, where one constructs bases and whatnot, and controls troops over a big map. This time with less units, simpler gameplay overall, and a The Lost World Jurassic Park theme, where you can control characters from the movie. This one particular line carries the weight of the entire game.
Didn't I die in the movie? I died.
I enjoyed the style of gameplay quite a bit, and for the most part it's done well here. Managing a more limited number of troops overall has its own distinct flavor of gameplay to it, and each mission has a lot of objectives, which end up being the priority for most of them. Stuff like collecting eggs or building certain things with supplies, I mean. There are, of course, dinosaurs roaming all across the lands, and some actual people to fight. To carry on the Command and Conquer tradition, of course, there are FMVs of Jeff Goldblum throughout the entire game, and some voice acting too, like I showed in that clip. It doesn't hurt that I really suck at these types of games, and this is a really simple version, which I still kind of suck at, but alright. Here's the thing, though. This game's got some pretty significant flaws that would make any fan of the genre cry. There's no way to easily and quickly swap to units, which is somewhat excusable when you have 4 of them, but is still really annoying when they're being attacked and don't know how to defend themselves on their own. There's no way to select multiple units either, and if you play this for like hours at a time, I imagine it might get very annoying very, very quickly. When there aren't these quality of life improvements, guess what? Your quality of life isn't good. It's not that bad, because like I said before, it's a very simplistic game, but simple doesn't mean it's immune to having flaws. Another Jurassic Park game on Windows is Operation Genesis. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. Normally when this happens, there's a reason, but I have no excuse here. This installation didn't work for me, so I never played it. What? You're gonna get mad? You're gonna get mad at me for not playing Jurassic Park. I'm literally just a little guy. I'm so little. I'm not even allowed to watch Jurassic Park because it's too scary for me, and it's past my bedtime, and it's a school night. Frankly, I shouldn't even be saying Jurassic Park at all. So, anyways, this is the Game Boy version of Jurassic Park 2. It's basically so different from the SNES original that I'm categorizing it as its own game. It's slightly less good than the original Jurassic Park 2 to me, but it's still interesting in its own right. It's almost a chibi version of Jurassic Park with big sprites and a gun that shoots big balls. Anyone remember Mutant Muds? It reminds me of Mutant Muds. The backgrounds look pretty great for the Game Boy, with well-defined trees and jungle and some of the best damn dirt I ever did see on the Game Boy. It's a pretty short and sweet platformer too, even if it doesn't get too crazy. Well, T-Rex chases, those are pretty crazy. Only real big issue is that you need to collect tons of key cards at certain levels, so you'll need to backtrack a lot, and this pads it out a lot. It's especially annoying when enemies respawn, a lot. Levels are obviously short, so it's manageable. Some people swear by this game being way better than the SNES version, and I can agree, but nah, I don't agree. No, I actually don't. I prefer it just a little more. In fact, it's literally right the next game after it. This is the sequel to Ocean's Jurassic Park on SNES. It's just weird to me. I mean, Jurassic Park SNES was a top-down game. Its sequel was a side-scroller. Jurassic Park Genesis was a side-scroller, and its sequel was a top-down game. Well, I did prefer this to the Genesis run-and-gun. Take that, Sonic freaks. But some of their problems are still here. You play as either Alan Grant or an original character named Michael Wolfskin to stop a company named Biosyn from trying to take over Jurassic Park's wreckage. Corporate warfare in a Jurassic Park game. This ain't the Game Boy version. You know, it's been a while since I've seen a Jurassic Park movie, but I don't think Alan Grant going back to the island to kill a bunch of people so Jurassic Park can reopen is really an appropriate plot for a sequel. Kinda gets on my nerves after a while when one death starts. Kinda gets on my nerves when one death restarts the entire level. Still though, I definitely do have to commend this game on not having lives or continues, and letting you retry a level each time. It's pretty refreshing when you've played so many old games in so little time as I have for this video, and it's nice how fair it is. Luckily, each level has sporadic health kits, so restarting isn't too big a bother. Some stages are more focused on platforming or mazes, to be clear. It's not all just long stretches. Enemies can be really frustrating to beat. Velociraptors appear right on the edge of the screen and immediately jump at you when you get near them, which makes it very annoying when they might take a few shots to get down, and you'll almost be guaranteed to take a hit if you're not actively anticipating them at every moment. The green raptors are fine, they only take a single hit to kill, but there are other types of raptors which are way stronger, and it's very annoying. This game does have a weird thing too. You have lethal weapons and non-lethal weapons, and you will get a game over for killing enough dinosaurs that aren't raptors or T-Rexes. None of this was explained to you in the actual game, god damn it. They did, however, include some really hardware-pushing cutscenes, which, hey, the Sega CD would think they're God's gift to mankind for being able to run this. And the game's atmosphere is absolutely chilling, too, just as it was in the original Jurassic Park for SNES. Unsurprisingly, that game did it a little bit better. Jurassic Park again, this time the Game Gear version. I don't think I've ever actually played a Game Gear game before, so it should be interesting. And hey, it is a pretty interesting game. It's pretty short, which isn't unexpected for a handheld at this time. It's set before Jurassic Park where, okay, this is pretty funny, the dinosaurs have all been unleashed and have started wreaking havoc all over the island, so you have to put them back into cages so that Jurassic Park can open. I hope to God this game is canon to the Jurassic Park series because that would be so funny. Anyways, that story is told with an opening cutscene, and it actually looks pretty impressive. The Game Gear as a system has always sort of stood out to me, because it has some really bright colors, and it's exemplified pretty well here. Sometimes this game looks pretty impressive for the time, and sometimes it looks really, really ugly, thanks to those exact same bright colors. It goes on a stage-by-stage basis, really. Each stage starts with a bonus car chase, which is a pretty damn fine way for a game to give some action right before a stage starts. Some people might think it's strange, though. This is disconnected from the stages themselves. You can't really die, and the only benefit from them is points, but I like that you can't die in these stages because that would be very, very frustrating. It's a shooting gallery game on Game Gear. Think about that for a moment. The actual levels are pretty fun, I suppose. A lot of the challenges aren't shooting dinosaurs, but stuff like lightning or fire, or just platforming, which makes it pretty interesting. A lot of the levels feel very trial and error based, though. Maybe it's just a small Game Gear screen, but I get hit by a lot of obstacles or dinosaurs from off screen, and it's got some flaws. Game Gear Jurassic Park pretty much surprised me by how much care was put into it. It's not like that much care, but a good amount, and it stands out decently from other licensed games of the platform, even if it's limited by its own technology. Some people really seem to dislike this game, but it's not bad whatsoever. Maybe a game just being on handheld lowers my standards, I don't know. If you're sick of Jurassic Park, I can assure you I am more sick of playing so much Jurassic Park. We're getting to some pretty quality ones though, or at least games that aren't completely boring. Jurassic Park for NES is a top-down action game, where you play as Alan Grant again, only he looks more like a Mountie this time, and you go through semi-open levels, doing stuff like collecting eggs, destroying nests, or flipping switches to save those kids from the Jurassic Park movies. So most of the game is exploring little levels and shooting lots and lots of little dinosaurs who follow you around. Looking around in this game is pretty fun. It looks great, and exploring the area is probably the most compelling part of this game. There's just something fascinating about NES games with big open worlds, stuff like Zelda or Dragon Quest, and this charm is definitely preserved here. Since it is such a late-gen NES game, there's a lot of expertise on show here. I feel like I've said that same phrase a lot in this video. The fact that I'm talking about a late-gen game so much, and it's because a licensed game is probably going to be at the tail end of a generation a lot of times. It's just a thing that happens. The actual shooting has issues though. There are so many little dinosaur bastards that are hard to kill, and if you like frequently respawning enemies and randomly getting ambushed by enemies from trees you can't even see, well, first of all, good on you for watching so far in this video when our opinions are so drastically different. And second of all, you'll like this game, you sicko. I don't think their clunky nature is too different from most NES games though. It's not that bad, just not the most well thought out. Solid NES licensed game to be honest, especially because it's actually a downgraded version of Ocean's SNES Jurassic Park. Just different enough to be considered its own game. Oh, and there's also Jurassic Park for Amiga. I'm not actually ranking this. It's just that I could not, for the life of me, get this game to run on my computer. What a tragedy. It actually does seem to at least be better than the NES game, from what I'm learning about, so that's a plus, I guess. If only they could release the damn thing on modern hardware like they did with every other Ocean Jurassic Park game. What's a 90s game console we haven't seen yet? Oh, yeah, the Sega CD, of course. Jurassic Park for Sega CD. So, this is a point-and-click adventure, and naturally is basically a technical showcase for the console, with futuristic Sega CD graphics that totally look better than Donkey Kong Country as the backdrop. Your goal is to gather eggs. I think we've been doing this a lot in these games, and it's a pretty straightforward point-and-click game, with a lot of finding wire cutters or pliers and using them on stuff, that sort of thing, or to use puzzles to defeat dinosaurs. Now, this is a really interesting game, Most of it is some slower pace searching around, and there is a pretty compelling look to the whole park. It's pretty, and the 1994 technology gives it all this sort of crunchiness to it, which looks cool to me. Most of what I like about this game is just zoning out and looking around the place. For a point and click game on Sega CD, it works pretty well even if it's pretty aimless. You kinda just get dropped in there and need to figure out a lot of stuff on your own. It's definitely a fun game to get engrossed in. There is some pressure on you though. You see that timer on the upper left corner? Yeah, there's a time limit on the game, and I feel mixed on it. On the one hand, it gives you more motivation and a reason to go on, but also the anxiety timer definitely makes it harder than it needs to be, and it's kinda arbitrary, really. This is an interesting game for sure, and this odd sort of title earns its place alongside the games just titled Jurassic Park. One more game just titled Jurassic Park, by the way. We are almost done with Jurassic Park. I'll talk a little bit more when I get to the original Lego Indiana Jones, but I really think the Lego games still hold up today. And honestly, Lego Indiana Jones 2 is a solid one. Even if to get what feels like a full experience, you need multiplayer. Also, playing this game on a keyboard sucks, but that's not going to factor into this review. I just like complaining. Look, this is a Wii game. It's awkward on anything else given the whole pointer control thing. The core Lego game experience isn't quite as enjoyable as I remembered as a kid. Sometimes it can feel like levels stretch on just a little bit too long, but it's still good. There's some minor issues with Lego Indiana Jones 2. There's some minor issues with Lego Indiana Jones 2, though, that honestly really start to pile up after a while, so to speak. This game does not justify its own existence, at all. Lego Indiana Jones 1 was released just a couple of weeks before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and featured no content from that movie. So this sequel was created basically just to incorporate Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and it redoes a lot of the movies done in Lego Indiana Jones, as well as adding stuff from that movie. Don't get me wrong, they do change out some of the levels, so it's not completely pointless, but it still doesn't feel like there's much of a reason to go back to it when they were done so well in Lego Indiana Jones already. Some of the changes just make it worse. The choices for what's a level are weird to differentiate itself. Raiders of the Lost Ark does not feature a level based on the opening, for example, and it's paced weird compared to the movies in general. This sounds like a nitpick, but if this is your first Lego Indiana Jones game and you like the movies, it probably will feel weird. They should have just stuck to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in my opinion with some extras. Maybe some new original stories, or adapt some comics or games. The big new addition to this game is the presence of open worlds themed around areas from the movies, where you can move between levels. It's not actually that different from already existing hub worlds though, and while they're fine and it does differentiate the game, I suppose, just having one hub world works way better in my opinion. Barnett's College was iconic, man. This is a good game, honestly it is, but it's got some oddities, less charm and wit, and usually it's not the best for a game to have me constantly thinking about a better game. In hindsight, this kinda started the end of the golden age of Lego games, but that doesn't mean it wasn't still part of that golden age, It was Lego Batman 2 that ended that golden age. Warpath Jurassic Park is the quintessential example of a game that isn't perfect, but is literally exactly what you could wish for considering the concept. A Jurassic Park fighting game. You play as a total of 14 dinosaurs from the 2 Jurassic Park movies released at the time, in stages based on locations from the films. Those characters being Acrocanthosaurus, Ankylosaurus, Gigantosaurus, Megaraptor, Stygimoloch, which by the way probably isn't even a real dinosaur, Styracosaurus, Suchomimus, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Albertosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, Cryolophosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus, Spinosaurus, and a Triceratops. I love dinosaur names. The gameplay isn't very deep, but it captures the idea of big dumb dinosaur fights in a great way, with big sweeping attacks and chaos all around. Sometimes humans will even walk in and might get taken out in the fight, which is just hilarious. They should have added a human character in this game. That would have been funny. If I had to describe what the gameplay feels like, I'd describe it as a strategic button mashing. It's not like you're pushing with no reason and just slamming buttons, because you have a rough idea what you're doing. But if you don't button mash at least a little bit, the game's gonna be harder. I don't know, it's just a game where you press buttons a lot, pretty randomly, and it makes a T-Rex swing its tail around. That's how the gameplay feels. There aren't too many big modes besides an arcade mode, just a versus mode, survival mode, multiplayer mode, and a choice mode, where you pick the opponent you fight against each time in an arcade mode. But one thing that's interesting is a museum mode, where you can view models of each dinosaur and information on when they lived, as well as their weight and average height. This is a nice addition for sure, and I mean, Jurassic Park was the movie that got people interested in paleontology, Indiana Jones got people interested in archaeology, and Jaws got people interested in sharks. I was going to say marine biology, but it's just sharks. Maybe more information on what they were like or where they lived would have been nice, but it's still funny to see this on the PS1. Warpath Jurassic Park was such a crazy idea, and it might have gotten some crap for not being the deepest game, but you can't fault a dinosaur fighting game for being dumb. You just can't. I won't let you. I mentioned this game before when talking about its lesser sibling, but here we are now at Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the Graphic Adventure. A point-and-click adventure, retelling the events of the Last Crusade. Like basically any LucasArts point-and-click adventure game, you have options like look, talk, push, pull, and use them to complete a variety of puzzles. They're also really hard, and I suck at them, but hey, that's just a me thing, and I'll talk more on the puzzles in a little bit. The game looks pretty advanced for the time, and I really enjoy the way the story of the movie is captured so accurately, but with its own distinct style. Getting to explore each location makes it feel more fleshed out than the movies for sure. You can click basically anything or do a combination of some weird stuff, and Indy will probably have a reaction anyways. Not always anything crazy, just like, oh, is that a book? It's about snakes. I'm Indiana Jones, I hate snakes. That's a defining character trait for me. And it's still fun to see. Especially at the point where I often find myself at, where I just do whatever I can to continue. I've been saying this word so much that I kinda hate it now, but some of the movement and how you select options can be pretty clunky. It's definitely not as clunky as some of the lower ranked games I have on here, because they're bad, because they're clunky. But once you get used to it, it works pretty nice. Now, those puzzles are the sort of thing that take dedication. Some real dedication, because it's very much quality over quantity on display here. And you need to use tons of items and look basically everywhere to be able to do these things. There's even a literal replica of Henry Jones's diary that comes with the game, like a paper version that was used as a form of piracy protection, which also helps you out for some of the puzzles. In PDF form if you're on Steam, of course. It only takes about 5 hours to beat though, so it's not going to be the most long, deep gameplay experience out there. Do note, there is also some pretty basic combat, which is alright, but there will always basically be a way to avoid it, and in fact there are multiple solutions for tons of things. Even in the beginning of the game, you can choose to just go to Venice or your dad's house, or teach a college class like your lazy ass is supposed to do instead of going out to look for Jesus cups. There's a lot to this game, and while this style of game isn't really my thing, I can still acknowledge it as a classic. I'll say this, the game being cool definitely makes me hate the action game variant a lot more. We've seen our fair share of Temple of Doom, and every other 80s indie movie for that matter, but this is one of the most iconic games based on them yet. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is an Atari arcade game, Midway Atari, not OG Atari, released in 1985, and while it's simple, it does a great job delivering fun in short bursts. There are 3 main stages in the game. The first is probably what takes up most of your time. You run through a cave, climbing up ladders, and whipping thuggies, bats, and snakes to rescue enslaved children. It's really frantic, since if you're not quick, Mola Ram could show up to throw fireballs and stuff at you, so you need to watch out for that. It is some very chaotic fun. I would say the main issue with this is that since it's an isometric game and not a fully 2D one, certain very narrow catwalks can result in you needing to adjust to be able to whip open cages, and that can very easily result in you falling off, which is a little cheap when that's an instant death. But it can still be watched out for. This section is also, of course, where you get to swing across gaps with your whip. The next stage is a minecart chase where you whip bad guys, and the third is a section where you avoid a few enemies and lava to get a Sankara stone, which is replaced by a confrontation with Mola Ram the third go-around. So these stages absolutely contribute to the chaos, even if most of it is contained in that one first stage. This is one of those arcade games that's repetitive on paper, but absolutely doesn't feel that way in practice, and it's always feeling new. The arcade version of Hook, developed by the Japanese company Irem, is actually a really fun time. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up played across 6 stages, where you'll battle pirates and pirates, although some of these do make me question what they're supposed to be. You play as Peter Pan or some of the Lost Boys, but why would you not just pick Peter Pan each time? With beat-em-ups of the time mostly having similar level structure and ways of fighting, atmosphere and the look of each level is a priority to get right. And in Hook, the levels are all bright and cheerful, and you can clearly tell by the character designs that this is the Japanese company taking on a Western property, which I love that look. Like, I love games that look like that. As for how it plays, it's your typical beat-em-up enhanced by the sheer fun factor of Peter Pan's move where he spins in a circle. It's great. I love it. Deadass, that single move is a lot about what I remember about this game, and the sound effect is so satisfying. Like most beat-em-ups though, it can also get tiring by how repetitive it is after an extended play session, which isn't helped by the game not having that many items to pick up. This game opts for more traps and stage hazards, but those aren't really guaranteed to work each time, and so it does kind of feel like if you beat each enemy, it's the same way. But, like, it's noticeable how much you repeat, you know? The final boss is unsurprisingly Captain Hook, but he's also an enhanced version of mini-bosses you fought earlier, with barely any original moves to him, so that's slightly lame. The game could have been better at presenting different set pieces, because a lot of the locations were either outright repeated, or just didn't feel that original. But hey, they still tried at least, and this is a movie game, so it's not that big of a deal. I haven't seen Hook, so I couldn't tell you how good an adaptation this is, but it is a fantastic example of the beat-em-up genre. Minor issues I had don't even come close to seriously impacting the fun I had with it. It's still a pretty polished game. Also, Rufio gets to live. Yay. This is the sequel to my favorite game, Jurassic Park for Sega Genesis, based on everyone's favorite movie, The Lost World Jurassic Park. The Genesis version of The Lost World is a top-down adventure game that looks open, but is essentially mission-based. You go through levels to get a dinosaur that needs to be captured. I think the structure is really great, actually. It's definitely linear, but the levels have a few branching paths, and they feel like they give you the advantages of exploration, while still having the benefits of linear level design. Moving through this game feels pretty nice. You play as a character I'm assuming is supposed to be Alan Grant, but he's unnamed, going through Isla Nublar, taking on missions to capture dinosaurs. Obviously there's a lot of action, and it feels alright. Nothing really feels wrong about it, which doesn't sound like a compliment, but believe me, I've played so many games for this that I've been so wrong, so it's kind of a big deal. This is definitely a step up from Appaloosa's previous Jurassic Park attempts, and it's fun to run around shooting these lanky dinosaurs, or people with guns trying to shoot you for some reason. I absolutely have to dog points for the dinosaur capturing, though. I suppose you're supposed to run into cages and have dinosaurs chase you in there, but oftentimes they just don't chase you or just get stuck. They have to reset. It's obnoxious. It's pretty obnoxious. Also, I need to mention dinosaur facts. They have dinosaur facts, that's always a plus, but it's just their name and weight. Don't you cheap out on dinosaur facts here. The game looks pretty great for a Genesis game. It was a very late release after all, but the colors look a little too saturated for me, to be honest. The dinosaurs look pretty funny though, and I think the atmosphere is an improvement from Jurassic Park on Genesis, but not better than Jurassic Park SNES. Sorry to bring up a 30-year-old rivalry here so much, but I think that game is probably the peak of Jurassic Park games of that era. We're not talking about it yet though. The Lost World Jurassic Park for Sega Genesis is probably slightly above an average licensed game of the time. Look, it's the first ever game to simply be called Jurassic Park. I lied, we don't have one more game titled Jurassic Park left. We have two more. Jurassic Park for arcade. The 90s one, made by Sega, is a nice, clean, on-rails shooter, which of course does mean I'm not having the full experience without a fancy seat and the joystick, but it gives me a good picture of the game. And hey, it is a pretty fun one. This game's an absolute spectacle, with you shooting all sorts of funny dinosaurs, and later on there even starts to be volcanoes exploding and shit, making it absolute chaos as you just kind of shoot everything. Why do they have volcanoes in Jurassic Park? I would say that spectacle is probably most of the appeal of this game. It's like 20 minutes long, but there is some variety in your gameplay, from huge T-Rex chases, to having to get raptors off your face, to shooting Brachiosaurus heads, to the whole volcano stuff. It's a fun short ride that isn't going to be too deep, which is exactly what you could want from an arcade game like this, to be honest. You might be able to make the case that it's a little repetitive, but it's so short I don't think it hampers your enjoyment. The Lost World Jurassic Park is sometimes considered one of Sega's best arcade games. It ramps up the spectacle and graphics spectacularly from the other one, and I couldn't get it to work on my emulator. Sorry. Since the look of these two games are a huge reason why you'd play them, I think I can safely put this ahead of the original arcade shooter. Yeah? Oh well. What's the next game? Okay, what the fuck? Is someone messing with me right now? No, but seriously, the most recent of the arcade shooter Jurassic Park games can be found absolutely everywhere. I couldn't emulate it though, and yes, I could play it, but you see, that would involve taking an 8-minute drive to an arcade near me. An 8-minute drive that's also a 50-minute bus ride, an hour-long walk, which should give you an idea as to the state of public transport infrastructure in this country. Wasn't this supposed to be about Jurassic Park? Whatever, there's like 60 other games I reviewed. I don't need to be that thorough. I'm only really ranking it at this spot because of that gag, by the way. I have no idea where it would actually be. I just want to say thank God all the new Jurassic Park games are based on Jurassic World. Well, that is of course, except for Jurassic Park Survival. I don't know why I even counted this as a game, but Jurassic Park Survival is indeed among the 68 games I have on the list I'm using for this video. I kind of thought this video would take longer than it did to make, so I put it here just in case, and I have to mention it somewhere. Obviously, this doesn't mean this is in the place. Like, this isn't where I'm ranking it. I'm just talking about it when I can here. I don't even want to think about the prospect of new Jurassic Park games releasing anymore, because I've played way too many of them in quick succession. Also, god damn it, there's a new Indiana Jones game coming out too. See, this is the problem with making scripts where you talk about, like, over 60 games in one. I was pleasantly surprised by The Adventures of Tintin's Secret of the Unicorn. I only knew about this game because I thought, oh, I bet that Tintin movie has a game based on it. And it did. Here it is. This game is a puzzle-based platformer, where you go through stages and potentially beat people up in a story based on the adventures of Tintin movie. And yes, Steven Spielberg was heavily involved in the development, which just goes to show he isn't just good at making movies. Well, this is a pretty simple game. It's very well made. The puzzles have a charm to them, and the movement is incredibly fluid, making it fast and satisfying to run through the stages and do the puzzles, which are of course really simple, but that's still good for a game like this. It just feels great. In these 2D stages, which are the majority of the game, there's also sections where you beat up enemies, which you only really need to punch like twice to actually defeat them, but it still feels fun, and it's got a charm to it as the movements are exaggerated, and look at their legs when they're knocked out. It's so funny. That's like some Lupin the Third shit. It definitely feels Tintin-like, I'll say that. And the game has this comic book aesthetic, which of course also matches everyone's favorite Orientalist in hindsight adventure comic series. And while it looks somewhat odd paired with the movie characters, I still like it. There's also some mini games, like a scene where you fly a plane. Open said plane's door when it crashes in the middle of a desert, which adds some depth to the game and represents the movie. There are also certain 3D areas where you walk around and explore a bit, which is nice. The only thing is that sometimes you have to fight in 3D, which just doesn't work nearly as better as the 2D side-scrolling sections. I really enjoyed this game, and even though it's not got any Uncharted crazy set pieces, it's just well designed. And also, did I mention you can play as Snowy? You can. It's pretty good. I will fistfight anyone who says the classic LEGO games don't hold up anymore. Cause yes, it's for kids, and yes, there's plenty of games better than them, but dude, I think LEGO Indiana Jones is the best video game depiction of the Indiana Jones movies. There's just something that clicks, about this game and the Indiana Jones license. It's very focused on building and puzzles, which brings to mind the iconic progression from the movies, and it makes this feel like an adventure movie in a way other games can't really capture. Plus, in the typical LEGO game fashion, each character has abilities that help in the adventure, like short characters getting through passageways, or these Nazi doors, which to me... feels like how everyone works together in adventure movies. The levels are the absolute perfect pace, and they feel like they end right about at the perfect spots and don't overstay their welcome. Like, there's always the perfect amount for everything, which is refreshing after playing LEGO Indy 2. The Hub World is also way better than that game. It's based on Barnet College, and it doesn't do anything fancy, but it's fun to explore around. There's plenty of rewards you get from doing so too. I hope I wasn't too biased by my nostalgia here, because as a kid this game was an essential part of the Indiana Jones experience for me, rivaling the movies themselves. But hey, LEGO Marvel Superheroes or something wasn't as an essential part of my childhood experience of that franchise, so consider it a compliment to LEGO Indie, okay? Also, before anyone says, I am aware LEGO Jurassic World has levels based on Jurassic Park, and Steven Spielberg is in the game. No, that doesn't mean it counts. Come on! You know how people debate over if the SNES or Genesis versions of Aladdin is better? I genuinely hope such a debate does not exist for Jurassic Park, because it's so incredibly obvious which is the best. Ocean's Jurassic Park for SNES. Yes, the amount of titles is getting convoluted. I have to just casually refer to a game as Ocean's Jurassic Park SNES. It's a sort of non-linear, top-down adventure with first-person dungeon crawler-like areas. Yeah, two odd things for the SNES. You play as Alan Grant with a variety of weapons, You play as Alan Grant with a variety of weapons, and a lot of the game will be spent wandering around the park, shooting, or shocking dinosaurs with a ridiculously overpowered cattle prod. You look for eggs to collect or ways to open gates. Really, just being on the park has this sense of magic to it, with different types of dinosaurs at every turn keeping you on your toes, and all sorts of secrets to look for. But most importantly, it's atmospheric in such a satisfying way. Mostly because of the music, a lot of it has to do with the music, which is one of the few on the system to use stereo sound and is absolutely incredible. The only issue with it is that these songs are supposed to transition seamlessly between areas of the park. They don't do that. They just kind of stop and start again, leaving you with a second or so of silence, which is a bit of a strange effect. Regardless, this is a game that's just fun to walk around in, and I really enjoy how it gives you just enough information so that it makes sense while leaving tons of how it actually works for you to figure out. It's just got a lot of things to it. And what other Jurassic Park game has this thing in the pause screen? Literally the best idle screen in any game ever. Other games have dinosaur facts, but so far I haven't found one with the silly DNA cartoon. Unfortunately, this game doesn't have a password system, and yeah, for a game like this, playing it in one sitting is a pretty daunting task, so that's a flaw for sure. So those first person sections, huh? I mean, you have all your guns in these sort of levels, so they are essentially FPSs. This was before Doom, and on console, it's pretty impressive. It's probably going to give more than 50% of people motion sickness, but at least it works. The action can be pretty fun too if you can get past some choppiness. Yeah, it doesn't run the best in case you couldn't tell. Also, I guess Wolfenstein 3D already existed, so maybe that makes it slightly less impressive. Still impressive though. And another thing that's impressive is that I have talked about so many Jurassic Park games so far. And a lot just titled Jurassic Park, but this still managed to be one of the better ones. I would totally buy a fridge of this. The second point-and-click adventure of the Indiana Jones series. I like this quite a bit more than the last Crusade graphic adventure game, but it does share a lot of its structure and gameplay with it. Even with the selecting an action list on the bottom of the screen thing, it tells an original story, and I've said this word a lot, but it is super charming too. Not just the story, the whole game has the charm seen in the last Crusade graphic adventure. It tells an original story, and it is super charming too. Not just the story, the whole game has the charm seen in the last Crusade, the graphic adventure, turned up to 11. There's even voice acting, which is a big plus. It's a story of Indiana Jones and a new female character named Sophia Hapgood, who is somehow a more morally dubious archaeologist than Dr. Jones, traveling the world to look for Atlantis before the Nazis can get to Atlantis and harness its power to further their nuclear bomb research. This game has the funniest opening intro ever. It's just Indy falling through a bunch of floors. It's funny. Instead of having puzzles based on items, there's more of a focus on talking to people and trying to get them to allow you access to places or help your investigation in other ways. You might be able to make a case it's not very indie-like, but I think it's fun to see some other sides to him explored, and puzzles are still a big element. Plus, each of the characters are exaggerated in such a way that makes them memorable, lots of funny accents, and while it's easy to get an idea of what to say to them, it's still a challenge, and there are lots of clever solutions to problems. For example, there's a racist British guy who you have to convince to let you into a Mayan temple, because Mayan temples somehow have to do with Atlantis now, and by doing so, you need to know the name of Plato's Lost Dialogue. Long story. So, you guess a random Greek word, and then a parrot repeats it. Talk to the parrot, and it turns out he knows a lot about that subject. So then if you tell the racist guy you don't know the title, and the parrot repeats the word title, boom, you go get the title from the parrot. That right there is a solid puzzle, and there are plenty just like it in The Fate of Atlantis. It's a pretty big step up from the last Crusade graphic adventure, and I do wish they had more of these Indiana Jones graphic adventure games, just to see where they'd go. Well, not for this video. I do not wish there were more games that I would have to talk about. In case you forgot, there was also an action game version of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the graphic game. I envy you if you have forgotten. And yes, there was one for the Fate of Atlantis. No, this isn't actually ranked that high. I couldn't play this game. I swear I tried. For some reason, I was unable to select things in game, leaving me unable to review it. What a tragedy. Here's some footage of me running around. Yeah. I'm wary sometimes of constantly comparing one game to other popular titles, because I feel like it can sometimes result in shallow criticism. But Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine is absolutely Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider. I haven't actually played Tomb Raider though, so yay, I could talk about it in a deeper way. The 3D version of Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine will definitely be pretty damn hard to get used to at first due to its controls, and I definitely struggled a bit initially. Switching between weapons and knowing how to use them isn't very straightforward, at least on PC, and the tank controls are the very definition of clunky. After playing a little more, however, I began to see why it was such a popular genre at the time. This game should really be called an action 3D platformer or something. Platforming plays a pivotal role, and while the clunky controls are frustrating, they're slow and deliberate. Meaning there's almost a type of... there's almost a type of strategy in how you move. All of your actions need to be hand-picked in a way. This even extends to combat, mostly using guns, which I find pretty fun considering spacing and movement is emphasized more than aiming. It's just hard to find an experience like it in the modern day. Plus, you can't really fault this game for being derivative of Tomb Raider when Tomb Raider was so heavily inspired by Indiana Jones. The platforming actually feels pretty good too, since Indy can grab ledges when you need to do a massive jump across a pit. But what's a little frustrating is that there are no checkpoints in the level. You kinda have to save before risky parts, or risk restarting a level, which isn't the best choice. It almost encourages save scumming. There's also treasure in each level, which can be exchanged for money, for stuff like healing items or poison kits, which is a nice way of implementing collectibles, and making me actually want to get them. The highlight of this game is actually probably the story. It's set in 1947, now with commies as the main villain. The USSR allied with Nazis at one point, so can I make the little Nazi counter go up if I kill them? Whatever. I don't even have any footage of me killing them. So they kind of beat Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to it. And yes, I'm just gonna say it, Stalin's USSR definitely earns the comical villain treatment of the Nazis from the indie movies. So you work with the now CIA agent Sophia Hapgood, the character previously mentioned in The Fate of Atlantis, and you have to find 4 pieces of the ancient Babylonian infernal machine before the Soviets can. Said machine's basically a more powerful nuclear bomb, you know. And yes, that's basically the same plot as Fate of Atlantis with the whole nuke thing. But it's still kind of different, I don't know. Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb is the best Indiana Jones video game ever released. Here's why. So the game plays like an evolution of the Tomb Raider style, but movement and action flow is way better, and it's aged much more gracefully. It strikes a perfect balance between platforming being a focus and challenge, as well as better fleshed out puzzles, exploration, and action sequences. So while this game is functionally pretty similar to Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, it is very different in practice. No tank controls are present, which is very much a positive, and this game hasn't aged that poorly. It's still like 20 years old though, so in some ways it's aged. Camera control was a big criticism of the game, and to be completely honest, I never found it to get in the way at any point, but that might be because I played on PC. It's probably a different story on PS2. I found it to flow pretty well as a seamless experience. Combat is a little iffy, because certain encounters can... Beating someone to death can be very annoying if you're out of bullets, or you don't have a knife, and you spend like 20 seconds punching them till they're dead. But otherwise, each character is animated in a surprisingly realistic way that makes fighting have a visceral quality to it. It's way better than the simple way it was handled last generation, and I do like the increased focus on combat. Really, the game just makes great use of Indy's fleshed out movement and gameplay, as running around, platforming, and rolling places feels good. The story is still at least somewhat up to Indy standards, if not... The story is also up to Indy standards, if not feeling like a movie. The story is also definitely up to Indy standards, even if it doesn't really feel like a movie. It's about Indiana Jones being commissioned to find the secret, lost, totally unknown, we don't know anything about it at all, tomb of Qin Shi Huang, which was never been found, and definitely would be in an Indiana Jones movie. Actually, the tomb was discovered in 1974. So, you're recruited by the most obvious twist villain ever before the Nazis can get it. It's actually a direct prequel to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and it actually leads up to that movie's intro. That's cool, I suppose, but I do kind of feel like it's better to leave that intro a bit ambiguous to give it sense of mystery and all that. So, this game feels good to play. Kinda. But that kinda is way quieter than every other kinda I've already had to say throughout this entire video. Yay. Boom Blocks is a game that can inspire many silly nicknames. Angry Birds in first person. Deliberate Jenga. A third example I can't think of. But it is a concept that's fairly simple to get. You shoot baseballs at towers to try to knock down gems, so these little block people can get them. Yes, this looks like shovelware, especially because it's on the Wii. But what shovelware was directed by Steven Spielberg? Yes, this was actually directed by him. It wasn't just his idea. He did direct it. It's such a simple concept, yet it's so satisfying to try to figure out the right way to shoot a big tower to cause as much chaos as possible. The sound design is superb, and it makes it feel great. There are even levels based on grabbing and removing blocks too, which means it's kind of an actual Jenga game, but probably better than any Jenga game. There's a ton of levels with all sorts of themes. You could get a level based on shapes meant to look like things, a big fortress, or a level where you have to remove blocks while keeping a baby cow upright. It might be weird to have such a simple game so high up, but it's a great concept, done even better in execution, and there's a lot of it. Yeah, I'll stand by this game's placement. There's also a sequel to Boom Blocks titled Boom Blocks Bash Party. I'm not gonna play this, because Boom Blocks is technically on here as a bonus game, right? Like, it was directed by Spielberg, but the concept of this video is games based on movies directed by him. I'm just having these on here as like a consolation prize for people who might complain I don't have literally every Jurassic World game on here. Anyways, it has some mechanics and new levels from Boom Blocks. I'll still count it as one of the 68 games, even though I'm not talking about it. This video is awful. While this series nowadays gets considered nothing but a COD ripoff, the first Medal of Honor game was an extremely sound concept and a really fun game. While it might not have been directed by Steven Spielberg, the concept and story was created by him, so I'll rank Medal of Honor here as the best spot in the video. Medal of Honor is a PS1 first-person shooter game about one ridiculously picture-perfect soldier doing a bunch of missions against the Nazis. If you could have guessed what Spielberg's idea for a game would be, I'm sure that would be your second guess beyond a physics-based block puzzle. It's got that absolutely addicting gameplay loop of GoldenEye where you complete objectives in each level, meaning you can't always go in guns blazing with the aim of killing every enemy, and you need to take a more tactical approach. So it really encourages you to think a lot more, and in a very memorable way too. An FPS for smart people, if you will. It has similar controls to GoldenEye, but here it works much better on a controller, and it's not literally unplayable unless you have a mouse and keyboard patch. But there's still a sense of jankiness with you needing to slowly move a reticule each time to shoot that Nazi scum, and it is another title that needs to get used to town, even though once you do get used to it, it's so much fun. The game is mostly set outdoors and in abandoned towns, usually against a beautifully somber night sky. Easily one of the most atmospheric shooter games you'll ever find. There's also a certain cartoonishness to Nazis. I mean, what a shocker, it's Steven Spielberg. But their movements can be telegraphed, and they're just like a lot of fun to shoot. Design also means that you can probably hear them around a corner, maybe like speaking German, or just in your vicinity, which makes it feel so satisfying for a game like this at the time. Did I say vicinity like virginity? Okay, we're going anyways. I'm too tired for this. Medal of Honor, in the context of the PS1, is honestly one of the more memorable shooter games out there, and it was especially impressive for the time. It's worth playing for sure if you like the genre, or just the PS1 console in general, and the whole PS1 aesthetic, you know? So, that's it. Sorry if I didn't review every game too in depth. I hope you can forgive me, since I did talk about like 70 of them. Now, I'm going to be honest. I played a ton of games for this video, and none of them absolutely blew me away. I loved plenty of these games, but there's not really a ton of things I'm going to remember as really great besides some of the top games. On paper, that sounds disappointing, but that was never the goal of this video. It was to discover some lesser known aspects of video game history, while torturing myself as a secondary goal. It was a success. Both goals. I played some weird games, and finding out so much about the licensed game history of movies that were special to my childhood is so much fun. And Hook. I haven't seen that, but I do have fond memories of Disney's Peter Pan, so that counts. So, thank you all so much for joining me on this journey, because I might not have played peak, but I have played some insane stuff, some fun stuff, some weird stuff, some interesting stuff, some really awful stuff, and some funny stuff. If I had done this, I wouldn't know Boom Blocks is actually a really good game. I wouldn't have re-experienced Lego Indiana Jones and found out it still holds up, nor would I have played my best game on this list. This was a super fun project for me, and I hope it was for all of you too. I might actually miss being able to fall back on one of these games whenever I'm bored now, but at the very least, I'll have other things, better things to look forward to playing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.